Good day, my friends. We are back with another Q&A. If you're wondering what I'm wearing, yes, it is my... Where's the logo there? It is my Team Canada hockey jersey. I can't help myself. Last night was so amazing. I love you, America. But man, that win was necessary and felt good. We're going to talk about the new lectionary versus the old lectionary, questions on what about how many readings in the new Mass versus the old Mass. What's that all about? And also common arguments against traditionalists, which actually kind of result to Antiquarianism, which is a heresy. We'll talk about that. Stay tuned. All right, so the first question here, my friends, is about the new lectionary. The question is there a reason why the epistle is sometimes called the lesson or instruction? I understand they are used interchangeably and refer to the same thing. But is there a reason why one may be used and not the other in a missal for a particular Mass? To be honest, short answer, I don't know. I've never seen the difference. I've heard it called differently in different places. Epistle means letter, basically. And the letters were lessons. So I think it's honestly just interchangeable. But the meat of the question is, can you talk about the thing everyone says about hearing the whole Bible in 3 years if you attend the Mass every Sunday in the Novus Ordo? I've also heard 1 for daily Mass, 1 year for daily Mass. Is this idea of plowing through the scriptures another Protestantization of the new Mass? Compared to the old Mass, of course, where it's not as many scripture readings. And there you go. Okay, so I'll give you background. So basically, we have what is called the lectionary. This is the readings for each Mass, and it's often the case that similar ones are said throughout the week in the old Mass as are on Sunday. But there are different ones for feast days and things like that. If you flip through your missal, a lot of Marian feast days, it's like the ones from, I think it's September 22nd or 15th, one of those days. And a lot of time on first Saturdays, when it's a devotional or votive Mass for the Blessed Virgin Mary, you'll see a similar reading. But so what's the deal basically is kind of the most important thing. What's the deal with kind of the old and new lectionary? So the old lectionary reflects a deeper theological and spiritual coherence rooted in centuries of tradition. And this was all changed after Vatican II, which of course gave us the new lectionary. And this really was a rupture with the tradition of the Church. And one of the best scholars on this is Dr. Peter Kwasniewski. He has a talk on YouTube. It's called something to do with lectionary. If you look up Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, old lectionary or something like that, you can find it. There's also a transcript online at Rurate Celli. And it's his opinion that it's the change is basically based on a type of rationalism. So what is rationalism? Well, there are kind of, two extremes, let's say. There is an unbridled sort of sentimentality or a type of mysticism. And then there's this sort of unbridled rationalism or intellectualism. We always want to have a balance in the Church. So on the one hand, we want to understand what is happening in the Mass. Doesn't mean it has to be in the vernacular, but we need to have an understanding, we have to be catechized about what's going on. That's really important. On the other hand, it's not a lecture. It's not something where we want subtitles and it's not a conference, okay? It's a mysterious event. It's there's a sacramental nature. There's a hidden nature, all these things, because we are cerebral. We're also sentimental. We have a soul. We have a body. We have to have this, we have to ignite all of our different modes of knowing things. And the traditional liturgies are expert at this. They're, supremely mystical, while at the same time supremely cerebral. And there's this delicate balance between them. After Vatican II, we have this emphasis on the plain, on the rational, this idea of immediate understanding and so forth. So if we contrast the old one-year cycle of readings with the new 3-year cycle, we actually find that the old cycle is more pastorally effective because it's more symbolically rich and it's aligned with the church's liturgical tradition. While the new one, it's not as deep, but it's more broad. It's like there's less profundity, but there's more surface. And it dilutes the Mass's transcendent purposes, in my opinion, and the opinion of men like Dr. Kwasniewski. Now, as far as this idea that you go to Mass every Sunday in the Novus Ordo, you will hear the whole Bible. That's not true. I've heard that before, but that's not actually what happens. If I look at my notes here, I think it's like if you go every day for 3 years, it's something like 75-80%. I don't think it's every single reading in the whole Bible. I don't think it is. Yeah, so in the new 3-year cycle, aiming to cover more scripture, about 14% of the Old Testament and 71% of the New Testament is in the 3-year cycle, I'm pretty sure. But this is contrasted with the old cycle, which is 1% of the Old Testament, roughly. Oh, no, 1% and then 17% of the Old. Is that what it is? I might be wrong on that, but it's a lot less. But anyway, it's prioritizing quantity over quality because the breadth of Scripture covered, it disrupts the unity of the Mass, making it harder for the faithful to internalize the readings as they change yearly. So you have these cycles all the time. It's year A, year B, year C, ordinary time, whatever. And a good example of this is I'm going to pull up a related thing, and this is in the encyclical Quas Primas. Let me just bring this up here. By Pius XI, and he talks about, let me just Google search here. He talks about why he wants to have it. Oh, there it is. Where is it? Sorry, let me just find it. He talks about why it's important to actually have the same thing every year because of how we learn. Here it is. I'll share this with you. Wrong one. Sorry, that's another thing open. Let me just change it to my Chrome. Where is it? Chrome. Quas Primas. Okay, so here it is. Okay, so he's talking about the kingship of Christ. He says, and this is in the middle of the screen here, "For people are instructed in the truths of faith and brought to appreciate the inner joys of religion far more effectually by the annual celebration of our sacred mysteries than by any official pronouncement of the teaching of the Church. Such pronouncements usually reach only a few and the more learned among the faithful. Feasts reach them all. The former speak but once, the latter speak every year. In fact, forever. The Church's teaching affects the mind primarily. Her feasts affect both mind and heart, and have a salutary effect upon the whole of man's nature. Man is composed of body and soul, and he needs these external festivities, so that the sacred rites in all their beauty and variety may stimulate him to drink more deeply of the fountain of God's teaching, that he may make it a part of himself, and use it with profit for his spiritual life." History, in fact, tells us that in the course of ages, these festivals have been instituted one after another according as the needs for or the advantage of the people of Christ seem to demand, etc., etc., etc. So what's his point here? His point here is that you need to have repetition through the liturgy. And it has to be this thing that is meeting this need that is there. And you got to do it all the time. Because he talks about, I mean, he's not talking about the lectionary, because this is before the lectionary changed, but he's talking about the necessity to have a feast. So he puts out an encyclical on the kingship of Christ. But the encyclical he writes, he actually says, it's up to you now, bishops, to teach this to your people. And the most effective way to do that is through insistence on the kingship of Christ as a festival. That pertains to what we're talking about, because The rationalism behind the changes to the lectionary are that, well, if we just have the people hear more, then and read them more, like if we're reading them more of the book, they'll understand the Bible better, the faith better. Problem is, a lot of the Bible is hard to understand. It is. This is why, I recommend you read the scriptures for sure. I've read the Bible cover to cover. However, it's important to have a guide through it. Very important. And also, there's so much typology and prefigurements and things like that in the scriptures that what you really want to transmit to the faithful historically in the church is the mystery of redemption, the history of salvation coming alive, culminating in the propitiatory sacrifice of the Mass. That's why you're at Mass. Mass isn't the same thing as catechism. Pius X, I'm reading a biography of his by Dalgal. Oh, by the way, I recommend everybody goes and gets this. I actually want to show you this. I recommend you get this biography. It's called, well, I'll just look it up. Pius X from Te Deum Press. I don't make any money off this, by the way, so this just go help. This is an independent Irish Catholic publisher. Go find this book. The website's loading. There it is. Here it is. I'll share it. So this is, go to tedeumpress.com? tedeumpress.com, and just, they don't have that many books, but the biography of St. Pius X, best biography ever. And it's like $25 US or something like that. And I'm reading it. And so when he was a bishop, he laid heavy emphasis on how the priests were to preach and that they were supposed to do catechism, because he was explaining why there was a difference between the two. Sermons aren't catechism. Sermons can be catechetical, but sermons aren't catechism. So the sermon is supposed to lead people to holiness in the spiritual life in the context of the Mass. The catechism classes for the faithful, religious instruction, is to teach them the scripture A to Z. And they're different atmospheres. Anyway, so there seems to be some sort of confusion of purpose. Now, Pius XI says we need to institute these teachings and these feasts and things like that for the needs of the people. So maybe the intention behind the reformers was that more Bible is better. It does seem kind of Protestant because, never in the church's history has it been the case that they thought they should read the whole Bible. And you don't even get the whole thing if you attend every day anyway, in the 3-year cycle. But never was it like, oh, the solution to the problems is more, it's kind of like that more cowbell thing from Saturday Night Live, I got a prescription, or I got a fever. The only prescription is more Bible. That was never in the mind of the authorities of the church until Vatican II, which is very suspect for all the reasons, because everything since then has been kind of chaotic. And quite frankly, it's been a long time since I was at the Novus Ordo, but it's kind of disjointed. It's hard to make that many readings fit like that in the context of the Mass, Whereas if you go to the traditional Mass, it's very connected to the liturgical year. But now the liturgical year is the same every year, but with different readings. It's kind of weird. Okay, so that's kind of the Cole's notes of some of the problems with the new lectionary. Because as I said, the old one was repetition, same readings. It allows the faithful to deeply assimilate key passages of Scripture. And this familiarity, it breeds contemplation, meditation, enabling the parishioners to meditate on the same text throughout their lives. And that's super important, When you read the spiritual works of great spiritual masters teaching you on the interior life, they will expand 2 verses or 1 verse into whole pages because it's so deep. And that's important, Not that it's not important to read about the genealogy of David. That's important, obviously. But, it's I don't know if you meditate on the genealogy of David really in this context of the Mass, but if it's, Christ saying, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? That's a lifetime of contemplation right there. So you want to hammer home, basically. And that's gone in the new Mass. Sorry, I'm going to bring my stuff up here. I have my notes. Also, the old readings were carefully selected over centuries because of their suitability for worship, whereas the new lectionary adopts this kind of cover-to-cover approach. But what it leaves out, ironically, it leaves out certain very poetic and challenging texts. Or it has less poetic and very challenging texts, but they don't fit the sacrificial context of the liturgy. There's also the fact that the old lectionary has a limited scope. This is a strength and not a weakness, because it fits with the concise and symbolic nature of the traditional Latin Mass, where every element is freighted with meaning honed by tradition. So, for example, the epistle and gospel often connect typologically, with the Old Testament foreshadowing the New. Also, this brings back to the first part of your question. It's not always an epistle that's read. Sorry, sometimes it's a lesson from the Old Testament. That's the answer to it. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't think about the beginning. In the New Mass, there are 3 readings. There's Old, Epistle, and New. And in the Old Mass, there's lesson or epistle and new. That's why it says that. And also, I mean, the new one, quite frankly, is just artificial. It's made up by committee. Paul VI, when he